Okay, so we are back on Church History 101, and we are still in chapter 1. When I uploaded the recording last week and gave it a title, I gave it chapter 1A. So this is perhaps 1B as we go through the second half of the first chapter. The chapters themselves, I think, are a little long for a single class's discussion, just in the page count, but also, by the time we get into the next chapter, we're going to be in the Middle Ages, and it's going to feel like we're jumping far and wide, and we don't want to finish this thing in a month, and we have gone 2,000 years in a matter of 4 weeks. So spacing a little bit, I think, gives us some time to breathe, time to poke around some of the corners that this doesn't spend a lot of time on, and again, for us to talk about stuff that may come up in the passage. Had I been better up on the entire chapter, I'd read the entire chapter before last class, but I'd read it a couple of weeks before, and I just skimmed over our section to refresh myself. But if I had skimmed over both sections, there were a couple of things that I mentioned last week we could have easily saved to this week. Not the least of which is the discussion on Sunday versus Saturday, right? I didn't think twice about it, but it was kind of a natural. It comes up in here very distinctly, and we could have kind of hit it from there. But regardless, this is still talking about those first, we're going to say 3 or 4 centuries of the early church. But this book is also trying to give us a few different facets and dimensions. There is in the study of history, just world history or whatever, when you teach history, there are a few different major schools of thought, and the way that history is taught kind of shifts periodically based off of whatever pedagogy is in favor at that time. For some people, it's lots of facts, figures, and dates. And there's a very kind of mechanical, data-driven way to teach history. A lot of history has been told what they refer to as like the great man hypothesis, where you look at the important historical events, but you kind of concentrate on the movers and the shakers. If you're talking about, there's a war going on, well, then you talk about the kings and the generals and the presidents, because they had this kind of very direct influence on those events. That kind of shifted into a populist or a ground up model of teaching history, where you very purposefully took historical events and you try to get them from the daily person's perspective. So rather than talk about, for instance, the Pacific War and World War II, about, island hopping, or the Marines having this battle versus that, and, is it the Leyte Gulf, or instead you might hear a personal account of someone who lived in a fishing village in Okinawa, and what was their life like? And then do they remember the days that the planes came overhead and how they lost family members and stuff like that? So none of those perspectives, I think, are wrong. I think that life is very three-dimensional and complicated, and so having multiple facets is maybe a better way to understand the fullness of any singular event or any historical period or what have you. My personal temperament jives with the big details in telling stories. I think having the little perspective and the one-on-one personal perspective adds or sometimes not only a helpful dimension, kind of an essential dimension. But I'm one who, I love history because I hear all these stories, and some are adventurous and some are exciting and some are troubling and some are frightening. and some are just kind of cool, and some are deeply disturbing, and whatever. But feeling a narrative. And when I talk to people, my wife hates history, never liked it, and whenever I try to parse out why, almost invariably it's because they weren't told stories. And when I tell a story about a historical event, even the people who say they don't like history generally tend to have a good connection to it. So what's kind of interesting about this book is even within this chapter, I think we're given a little bit of those different perspectives. So this first section that we're getting to, the church in the pews, will be an ongoing section in each of the chapters. And it's basically saying, okay, now that you've got some context about what's been happening, what would that look like to a Christian in this period of time? Average Christian going to church. What does it look like? What might you experience? How did the big ticket issues filter down to what happens with you or to you? And so that's kind of where we're going to sort of be a little bit today. We are definitely, there's a lot of big ticket stuff here, but it's kind of pulling it down into the more human level, face-to-face, a little bit less abstract, maybe. So if I'm just going to start from this section and kind of work our way through, it starts off, interestingly enough, not just positing the synagogical versus ecclesial model that we talked about last time, like the Jewish Christians, the Jews who receive Christ as Messiah, still meeting in the synagogue until they're kicked out. And even once they're kicked out, they kind of model what they do on what they know. Like they're not inventing something out of whole cloth. They're like, well, this is what you do in synagogue. So if we can't go and do it there, we'll do roughly the same thing here. And that more Greek model, the ecclesia, those called out, or the assembly, ecclesiology, church. That's where church comes from. Old English word of kirk will come from ecclesia, and that's where we'll get church from. Romance languages do not call their churches churches, like in Spanish. It is iglesia, which sounds more like ecclesia, doesn't it? So anyway, it's just a linguistic thing, but there are real and practical differences to think about moving from your average Saturday synagogical worship to the church, and on Sunday, and what it's going to look like, and what you're going to do. In the synagogue, they obviously were not celebrating the Eucharist, for instance. But we get this in the ecclesia, in the church. We move from Saturday to Sunday. Some of this will be from the top down. It mentions Constantine, and with Constantine, the Christianity which had been flourishing and really moving to all levels throughout the empire hits the very peak. And in Constantine, it moves from, maybe the primary but unofficial religion to the official religion. And so now we have, Constantine saying, okay, from now on, Sundays are our day off. Okay, well, that comes from the top down. That's like the U.S. government saying this is a postal holiday. You can go to work if you want to, but we're not going to, and you're not going to get any business done. So you might as well take the day off. And so moving from a Saturday to a Sunday, but a lot of this reflects the ecclesia church function of worship that we talked about. Same thing as I mentioned, the Great Easter Vigil. Last week, it would be real natural here. Remembering that for a couple of reasons, but the persecution is certainly a big part of it. You didn't let people into the innermost parts of the church on a whim. there were two primary reasons why. Like, we're happy for anybody to come to church. Somebody just shows up, come on in, there's no secrets here or anything like that. But in the early church, there's kind of two principal reasons why the innermost rites of the church were considered, if not secret, then private, a family affair to which you had to kind of gain trust. And anyone who has married into a family or has had, someone marry a spouse or something like that, and having in-laws, you understand that just because someone gets married or gets married into the family doesn't mean that instantly they know all the history and they know all the inside jokes and they know all the hot buttons and they know, the first few times they use like a nickname that the rest of the family uses, it kind of feels funny. And the first few times everybody does what they always do on Christmas or Thanksgiving, but that other person doesn't know it yet. So there's that kind of feeling out. It requires some time. It requires some time because the stakes are so high. If what Jesus says is true, and if what the apostles teach is a reliable source of the truth of Christ, then these are of ultimate importance. They are of eternal significance. What you teach, what you do, what you receive, the act of baptism, the reception of communion, all these things are of eternal consequence. So you don't handle that flippantly or lightly, you handle it very, very seriously. The second one is because of the persecutions, because of the, not just the minority status of the church, but kind of distrusted, if not openly persecuted minority of the church. You had to protect the people who were there. The whole concept about somebody joining the church just to find out where you meet so that we could eliminate you all at once was not a fantasy. Especially because there is that great commission to spread the gospel and to bring people in. What happens when some of those people are coming in with dishonest motivation and they want to do you harm? How do you balance that? Do you balance it? You just let everybody in and hope for the best. And those times where it happened, we mentioned, the real consequences of persecution last week. I talked to you about the antimons that I used on All Saints Sunday. And that was an outgrowth of, we have to be able to run for it at a moment's notice, because that was real life for a long time. So that outgrowth is maybe best balanced through the process of the catechumenate. A catechism is a teaching tool of questions and answers, where the kerygma, that's another fun Greek word that gets mentioned in this chapter. The kerygma, which could also be likened to the paideia, I'm just throwing in Greek words for fun now, represented the teaching that was necessary for Christian discipleship, the content of the gospel, of our moral lives, of the history of salvation, of the meaning of Christ's death and resurrection. That was something that needed to be transmitted. You were taught this information. You were taught explicitly, like in a lecture, but you were also taught by watching what others did and then by doing it yourself. A very, very holistic sense of learning, but kerygma and paideia both are Greek terms that are mentioned in the New Testament, both by Paul, and both of them make reference to basically the body of learning that is necessary to understand and to become a disciple and to grow. These are very Greek terms. These are a very Greek model of, you want to know about the world, you want to know about philosophy, you want to know about politics, you want to know about farming or whatever. There's a body of content then that you ought to know, that the experts or those who have been very experienced in the field can then teach you. And in order to be a well-rounded person, and in order to be effective in whatever it is you're trying to do, you should be taught in this comprehensive fashion. There's a book's worth of knowledge you ought to know. That would be the paideia, and the kerygma would be just this proclamation of Christ that is of essential and salvific importance. So to be a catechumen, it means I'm going to sit and learn for a while. Early churches were, both in their architecture and in their liturgy, would kind of differentiate between the faithful and the learners. Sometimes the learners were in the back. Sometimes there came a portion of the service where the learners were dismissed. And that was because there was stuff that you needed to know, you needed to do, and maybe you needed to prove before you were onto the inside. Number one, because this is of eternal significance, and number two, because of the real temporal concerns about danger and safety. Not really. We have vestiges of this, especially liturgically. The entire rite of confirmation can be seen as an outgrowth of the catechumenal process, the catechetical. So that we have a catechism right now in the back of the prayer book. And when I do a confirmation class, I will often use the catechism, because catechism is just a way of teaching that's questions and answers, questions and answers. It's very, very Socratic, like Socrates. Who made you? We were made by, what is the chief end of man? I mean, stuff like that. So you give a question, and then you explain the answer, which then transmits the general set of knowledge that you ought to have. Blah, blah, blah. So the catechumenates were then taught, and they were tested, and they had to live by example these things that they said that they were learning. And then at the right time, they were finally fully brought into the church. That's why we have kind of a change in baptismal philosophy. Back in the book of Acts, Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, and the Ethiopian eunuch is starting to ask questions out loud about the book of Isaiah, and who is this talking about? And Philip says, well, let me tell you about this guy Jesus, and he does. And the eunuch is like, oh, I want to be baptized. Why shouldn't I be baptized? And there's some water over there. And Philip's like, let's do it. And so he baptizes them, boom, right there. Now we've got this process where you were probably a catechumen and you were a learner, and you were being dismissed before communion for like a year, maybe longer. You waited until the Great Easter Vigil. You waited until Easter morning. And then you were baptized formally with the assembly and on the festival and feast of the resurrection. And then you were in the middle, and other people were, kind of on the periphery. So we don't do that anymore, but there are vestiges of it. There's an outgrowth of things. Sometimes there's a story. There's a bunches of stories, but it's like I've heard it in two ways. One was about how to cook pot roast, and one was about how to cook spaghetti, but it's the same story, right? And so the newlyweds are moving into their first home together, and the new bride is going to cook dinner for her husband, and she's so excited for the first time, man and wife, and they go to make spaghetti, and she takes the pot, and she fills a pot of water, and she takes the spaghetti, and she gets a pound's worth of spaghetti, and she breaks it in half, and then she puts it in, and the husband, whoa, what are you doing? That's not how you cook spaghetti. The other version is it's a pot roast, but you cut the ends off. But this is the same story. And she said, what do you mean? That's how you cook spaghetti. She says, no, 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 you never break spaghetti. You know, no Italian would ever. Okay, well, first of all, I'm not Italian. But secondly, this is how you cook. I've cooked spaghetti a million times. My mother taught me how to cook spaghetti. He's like, nope, we're going to find out right now where this problem is. Call up your mother. Mom, okay, yeah. He wants to know why we break spaghetti. Well, that's because that's how you cook spaghetti. You break it to get it in the pot. Well, why do you do it that way? Because that's the way you taught me. Well, I do it that way because that's the way my mother taught me. Okay. So, is grandma around? Yeah, I just saw her. Let me give her a call. Get grandma. We'll three-way this call. Grandma. And the answer is that when grandma was first married and made her first pot of spaghetti, they could only afford a very small pot. And the only way to get the spaghetti in was to break it in half. So what became like this tradition that both was, this is the way it has been taught correctly, or how dare you do it that way, it's completely wrong, all started off with an extremely functional purpose. But over the generations, it becomes like, this is how it's done. Like the reason for doing it is now gone. Like both the mother and the daughter had pots that were big enough to just stick the spaghetti in, but they were, and to be perfectly honest, I break my spaghetti. Except when I cook here. When I cook here, I never break it. But at home, I break it every time. I like the smaller pieces. I'm not an Italian. Anyway, so stuff like the confirmation, catechism class, first communion, these, even the Great Easter Vigil itself, these are vestiges of things that happen for very specific functional reasons. But then as they've grown on, we've either lost why we did it, or we've kind of changed the purpose of why we did it. Sometimes you carry it on because it works and it's a good idea. Sometimes you think of new reasons. Oh, you know what? This also teaches blah, blah, blah. And it sort of grows away from that original reason. And sometimes the original reasons are just super practical that people have forgotten. You know, why was there a long catechetical process? Because they didn't want to be murdered by the person they just let in the front door. That's a pretty decent reason. Now, that's not a threat today, at least not here. So we don't have to do it in that fashion. Do we still have something that's kind of like that? Well, yes. In the rite of confirmation, we take children who were baptized as babies and we say, are you prepared to make this public proclamation on your own? Kind of taking an adult sense of responsibility for the faith that someone once took responsibility for you. Well, yes, I am. Okay, so we are going to make sure that you understand the content of the faith. We'll have a catechism class. We will teach you various prayers. My mother, I think she said she had to memorize the catechism and she had to memorize the 10 Commandments and something. I'm a big softy and I don't require that stuff. I always threaten the kids that there's going to be a test. There will be a test. And if you don't pass the test, you're not going to get confirmed. And I try to feel it out because I did it once and the kids panicked. So I try to like kind of back off if I sense that they're getting worked up. But the idea is we do this class. I go over the catechism. I teach the creeds. I want them to understand stuff. But then the test is I get them alone. I get them by themselves. Okay, you've heard all this stuff. We've talked about this. We've gone over the creeds. And you know what it means. Do you want to be confirmed? Yes or no? That's the test. It's a one-question test. And if the answer is yes, well then, that's all that confirmation really requires. Just like baptism. All baptism really requires is the willingness to do it. The work is done on God's part. So,
why the slap?
Huh?
Why the slap?
Right. So I wish I knew definitively. I have had two different explanations given by two different bishops. One of them I trust more than the other. One bishop that I actually trust more said he was slapping the devil out of you. It is a symbolic slap, but for both of them, they did give you a little slap. And when he says, I'm slapping the devil out of you, it wasn't intended to hurt you, but it was intended to represent in a symbolic fashion that through the laying on of apostolic episcopal hands and the giving of the Holy Spirit and all this kind of stuff, that you were slapping the evil and the death and the sin and the devil out of someone. And the other one said, for similar reasons, and the laying on of hands and the Holy Spirit, he said, it's wake up, Christian. And that was just a little too cute for me. And I didn't trust the guy anyway. So it's not that it's wrong, but I can't imagine that being an answer anywhere before 30 years ago. Like 100 years ago, they were still slapping people. And my guess is they were talking about slapping the devil out of you. Regardless. So there's a lot of this stuff that's happening on the...
Yeah. I didn't.
Yeah, I got
It is not universal. It's not even in the prayer book. But it's one of those things that gets passed along bishop to bishop, and a bunch of them do it. For instance, on the laying on of hands, and so I've definitely seen this. Not for me. I got like I had body weight pressed on top of me. So I felt it.
I'll keep that in mind.
Anyway, this is to say a lot of this is the people were experiencing firsthand in the early church. That's where a lot of this is coming from. It's coming from either something very practical that now 2,000 years later we have a vestige of, we have an echo, or we have an impression of, or it was happening because they had to make some choices. You can't do everything at the same time. You can't turn to the left and to the right simultaneously. So at some point, you just have to pick a direction. So something as simple as the format of the liturgy and the order in which things happen. There's kind of a functional, sensible pattern to it if you think about it. We have existing liturgies from... we have scraps of something as old as AD 95, but from the 2nd century and the 3rd century, we get more and more all the time. And sometimes it makes reference to things that have already happened. Like, obviously, you know that when you do communion, you do blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, if they're saying obviously in the year 110, then that means that it was widespread enough before that. So it wasn't being created at 110, it was just being talked about. Does that make sense? If I said something along the lines of, well, since everyone already knows that you have to turn the key in your ignition to get your car to start, then you can blah, 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 blah. Well, that means I'm presupposing you've been turning on cars with keys for a good long time. Does that make some kind of sense? Okay. So when you look at the order of the liturgy, it has kind of a sensible pattern to it. So, we come in and there is what we would refer to as the opening acclamation, blessed be God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that really serves as kind of a welcome now, doesn't it? And it kind of serves as a opening statement, and it makes some sort of sense. And then we have a collect of the day. And what is the collect? We pronounce it collect, but what it's doing in essence is collecting the prayers of all of the people into an initial prayer to say, today we could ask God about anything, but today we start off together with all of our prayers, everything we walked into this place with, and all of our worries or concerns or fears, and we come together and we collect them. And right now, God, we ask you to do this. And then next week, we're going to ask something slightly different. And the week after, it's slightly different. And then we hear from Scripture, and then we hear that Scripture explained through a sermon. Then we say the creeds, and then we have the peace, or we say prayers, the prayers of people. Then we have the peace. Does it have to be that way? No. Is there a sense to it? Okay. Well, once you come together, we need to hear the Scriptures. Shouldn't you hear the scriptures before you hear the sermon? Makes sense, because you're going to listen to something and then it's going to be explained. You could hear the explanation first, but I like hear the scripture first and the explanation, right? Well, then the creed's right after that. Well, could you say the creed's first? Well, sure. Maybe you want to come. First thing we're going to do is this is what I believe, and this is what I trust. Now I'm going to sit down and listen to the scriptures. The way we place it in our liturgy, we're saying, well, we've heard the scriptures, we've heard them explained, and then as a outgrowth of that, we have an affirmation of the faith that those same scriptures in that sermon pointed to, or prepared us for, or taught us about. Same thing with the prayers of the people. After we've made our statement of faith, isn't it kind of a natural outgrowth to then pray for each other? Sure. Could you have started the service praying for each other? Yeah. And there's some liturgies that actually do that. So, but you have to make a choice. You have to make a decision. And the early Christians are making decisions and making choices. And then once that pattern is established, once it starts to spread, well, then that's the spaghetti broken in half as well. It's not necessarily because the pot was too small. It's more along the lines of, we had to do it one way or the other way. We could argue either one. Neither of these is wrong, but we got to pick one. And once I pick one, why don't we just all do it the same way? Because it's kind of helpful. And then it moves on from there. The Great Easter Vigil very much is a vestige of this sense of not just the catechumenates being baptized once a year, but remember when I said last week about the nature of Easter and Sundays? It's not that Easter is a big Sunday. Wait, no, other way around. Sorry. It's not that all Sundays are Easter. It's just Easter Sunday is a big Sunday. All Sunday morning worship services are intended to be the feast of the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ in some small fashion. Easter morning is when we do it up real big. And when you look at the Great Easter Vigil, that's why there's like 10 readings from the Old Testament. We don't even do them all. I picked like 4. There's like 10 of them. Because what does it say in the beginning other than, let us now hear from Holy Scripture about God's plan of salvation throughout history. And then the first reading comes from Genesis. And we've got like 2 or 3 from Genesis, maybe 4 from Genesis. We've got from just a variety of places. There's stuff in the old, there's stuff in Exodus. There is stuff from the prophets, from Ezekiel and from Daniel, and there's all these different Isaiah, various choices. And what is that other than the big fashion of what we do every Sunday morning? We don't have 10 Old Testament lessons, but we do have one. We connect the gospel to what has gone on before every Sunday. We also connect it to the wider context within the Psalms and the rest of the New Testament through an epistle every Sunday. Great Easter Vigil, it kind of lays it out in a more comprehensive fashion. On a Sunday morning, we say, man, we don't really have enough time to do 10. How about we do, let's do 1. And that's where, So this is kind of where the pattern of Christian worship is developing over these first couple of centuries. The agape meal or agape feast, which was a very common part of the first century worship, kind of just sort of fell out of favor. First, it started to seem unnecessary because it was like you were eating twice. And then it was, well, that's going to kind of take the place of meeting in the synagogue, since we've gotten kicked out of the synagogue. But then when Sunday is proclaimed the day, and we start kind of considering what it is that we're trying to accomplish on Sunday, and it being the Feast of the Resurrection, and everything starts pointing in a Eucharistic fashion, and the agape meal just kind of gets less and less prominence. We're not meeting in homes anymore. We're able to meet in a building now that isn't being run over or overrun by people trying to kill us. So the permanence of the place means this is not, we don't really have a kitchen here. So we start seeing the bifurcation and split of living together as Christians versus worshiping together as Christians. That Acts chapter 2, where it's like, and they all lived together and shared everything in common, and they ate together and they prayed, and their numbers were added to daily. Well, as their numbers are added to daily, and that gets really, really big, and it begins to spread really, really far, you know, it's really hard to all live in the same place. It becomes just difficult to do some of those things. And so you have to, you know, now we have to kind of do our best in getting people together for these certain things. One of the certain things we're getting together for very early on is Easter. Now, he makes mention of Easter and Christmas, and Easter as a part, as an essential and significant part of the Christian calendar comes first. Why would you think so? It's actually something he doesn't mention, but he kind of assumes we understand. Why would Easter be the first kind of regularly observed holiday of Christianity and Christmas only come later?
The resurrection is important.
The resurrection is important, absolutely, because everything changes because of that. Like babies are born every day, but it's the resurrection that changes everything that we understand and know. This is, and I don't mean this to be like a duh moment, but they knew when Easter was. They knew when Easter was.
Yeah, they don't know.
So, well, because I want to talk about that for a second. His explanation was missing some pieces, but the first Christians coming from the apostles, well, when did Jesus die? When was he raised? They could give them a date because they were there. It happened last year. It happened 3 years ago. It happened when that other, I forgot which year it was, but it's the same year that the old cow tipped over the bucket. Oh, I remember that. That was 4 years ago. You know, because it changed everything and it was within living memory. The date of Easter, its connection to Passover was there from the beginning. But the birth has to be done retroactively. You know, imagine just up the street, 4 blocks away at George Jenkins High School, where there's, I don't know, like 3,500, 3,000 students. Maybe somebody in there is a future billionaire. Maybe somebody in there is a future senator. Maybe somebody in there is a future serial killer. Which one of them is it? I don't know. But as the years go and people make something of their lives in great ways for good or for bad, well, then you can say, oh, well, now I can look backwards and I can see from their earliest time, so-and-so always did and said this. Yeah, but you don't know that now, right? You only look backwards to try to make connections from the beginning. So Easter was always there from the get-go. But then having an understanding, well, that Christmas must be important too, not just because that's the beginning of the story of Jesus on earth, but the Old Testament prophecies point to this, and the gospel story talk about it as being significant. 2 different gospels mention it, 2 of the 4. Okay, that's a big deal. And Luke in particular gets into some pretty specific details with the shepherds abiding and the angels proclaiming and Herod trying to kill people and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is a big deal. So working backward, especially early on, I'm going to make the argument, I mean, just not with any kind of depth. I'm going to make the argument that the date of Christmas is not as arbitrary as it sounds. You get a question today, and it's always about Sol Invictus, or the Christians just wanted to subsume a pagan holiday. They were doing it all the time. They stole it or whatever. Or they just made it up. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Not so much. I don't think that's. I'm not saying that pagan holidays weren't co-opted, but why that one? You didn't co-opt any holiday. We have a lot of experience in the first several centuries of the church of someone like St. Patrick in Ireland or St. Boniface in Germany, who are taking what's already there and explaining it in ways where people can understand the truth of Jesus. This is no different than Paul on Mars Hill saying, "Oh, men of Athens, I see that you are very religious. You even have an altar to an unknown God. What is unknown to you, I will make known to you through the person of Jesus." Sol Invictus was not super popular, to be honest. That's the Unconquered Sun, SUN. That's a sun festival happening around what the later Europeans would refer to as Yule, but basically the winter solstice, or with the winter, is that right? Is it solstice?
Yeah.
Or okay, I get those terms mixed up sometimes.
Equinox is spring and fall.
Thank you. So, and you can kind of tell this astrologically, that or astronomically, when the less daylight, more nighttime, blah blah blah. There is some contextual evidence in especially the Matthew's gospel when they're talking about the birth of John the Baptist, because we can date certain things based off of Zechariah, his father, and when he was doing his temple duties, when they get the message about he's going to have this child and he's way too old and blah, blah, blah. And then you start extrapolating, well, what age must Jesus have been? Because they were both in the womb at the same time. John the Baptist was older. How much older? It can only be a number of months, because remember when Mary comes to visit Elizabeth, the unborn John the Baptist starts jumping around, and that spurs Elizabeth to speak the words that we now know as Hail Mary. So, like anyone who thinks that Hail Mary, full of grace, is just way too Catholic, you're just quoting the Bible right there. That's Elizabeth speaking words inspired by the Holy Spirit, because baby John the Baptist in the womb recognizes baby Jesus in the womb. Anyway, so the time frame begins to narrow, and it begins to shorten. This one's fun. I've mentioned this one, but I don't know. I like it because I like interesting things. The date of Easter, the date of Good Friday, the date of Holy Week was very well established in the early church. And that's because you had this large group of people who were there. And because it was recognized as significant as soon as it happened. Kids today don't understand 9/11. We all understand 9/11, but even they know when the date of 9/11 was. When was 9/11? It was 9/11. It was September 11th, right? So they may not have the context for it. We can all probably talk about where we were. What did it feel like? What were you thinking about? They don't. None of my kids are old enough to have experienced it. Even Jessie was born, but she was a baby. But even they know the date, even if they forget the 2001 part, but they know the date. So I'm suggesting that, like, Easter and therefore Good Friday and all that kind of stuff was very well understood in the early church because they were there. And they weren't likely to forget something so eternally significant. The date, the traditional date of Good Friday is March 25th.
That leads to a question. Why is there a formula instead of,
About calculating Easter?
yeah,
Well, let me get to that in a second, because that actually has a different reason. The traditional date for now, the actual what year, that's where it gets fuzzy. And we can like look backwards, and again, astronomically, I think they can determine that I think it was 30 versus 33 based off of other contextual clues and stuff like that. I forget. But anyway, March 25th, since the earliest time of the church, has been held as the date of Good Friday. Even though Good Friday now moves as an observance, it moves, but the day, which is now Mary Magdalene. It's not Mary Magdalene. It's the Annunciation, Feast of the Annunciation. March 25th is a Feast of the Annunciation. Count 9 months from March 25th. December 25th. So, was Jesus precisely born on December 25th? I can't tell you that for sure, but there's way more reasons than just we're going to steal a Roman holiday. And some of them are way more interesting than we give credit to sometimes. There was a very real sense that the life of Christ was going to be so symmetrically perfect for his divinity and for the gospel plan of salvation that had been worked out before the foundations of the earth, that the date of his conception was also the date of his death. Good Friday was also named the Annunciation and his conception because 9 months was December 25th, Christmas Day, his birth. And that is attributed to in other fashions and in other ways. And does that mean it's absolutely positively? No, but it's just to say it gets really, well, nobody knows when it happened and they just picked a day. Like, I think they had a bunch of reasons. And some of them are actually pretty interesting. The date of Easter, this is something that would affect people in the pews, as this section is talking about. Passover has a very specific biblically based calculation about how to do it. And it has to do with full moons and the month and all that kind of jazz about the equinox and the full moons, and it's in the spring and it's Passover. So Passover was going to move based off of astronomy, basically. There's a lunar cycle to it.
right?
So it's not just a day, but it was always going to happen in this certain time of the year, rather than an exact month and an exact date. In the sense of my birthday is July 25th, whether that's a Monday or a Sunday. Easter is always going to be on a Sunday, partly because of the Passover connection, but also because of this other calculation that they adopted later. So Easter, because Passover moves, so Easter will move as well. But it gets complicated, more complicated than that. Some of this is straight up, oh yeah, you're going to kick us out of the synagogue? Well, we're not going to use your calculations anymore. That'll show you. There's definitely a contrariness to Judaism that comes into the Easter calculation. So the Easter calculation, it takes a whole page to explain this. It's in the prayer book. It's in the beginning of the prayer book where you calculate the golden number. Oh my gosh, it is ridiculous. I will tell you how to calculate Easter. You Google it. That's how I calculate Easter.
First Sunday after, first full moon after the vernal eclipse.
There's a range of where it can be, and it's going to be on a Sunday. And that's good enough for me. It is no longer tied directly to Passover, the Sunday following Passover, as it might have been early on. But because Passover is also has a lunar calculation involved, you can't help but calculate them in a similar fashion, and they're always going to be pretty close to each other. They don't always happen on the same week, but occasionally they do. In the East, where the Julian calendar, rather than the Gregorian calendar, was still used to calculate liturgical dates. Even today, you will find Orthodox Christians who refer to each other as an old calendarist or a new calendarist, and the calendar is like it's like 1,000 years old. How new is that? You guys are weird. Occasionally they will coalesce, but typically Orthodox Easter is about a week after we celebrate Easter. Orthodox Christmas is our Epiphany. It's January 6th. They calculate in the same fashion, but the Greeks had a different calendar that was basically a week behind. One more little piece of the puzzle of the East and the West, of the Latin and the Greek starting to spread out, starting to become less and less like each other. Brothers turn into cousins, turn into second cousins, turn into strangers. There's kind of a lot of that happening. And I want to mention this. This doesn't spend as much time on the creeds as I would like, just because I like the process of the creeds, but it can get very complicated very quickly. So let me give you my nutshell. I like teaching the creeds. I like teaching the process of the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed and the Nicene Constantinople and the Creed of Chalcedon and the Athanasian Creed and all that kind of jazz. But let me give you the nutshell version. It's gonna take just like 4 or 5 minutes, and then anything else you guys are missing. Here's the nutshell version. Creed comes from the Latin word credo, which means I believe, but credo means something more expansive than I believe a fact. It does mean that, but it also means something, there's no one-to-one correlation from one language to another ever. You always have words that mean roughly the same thing, but sometimes it means 2 or 3 different things. Credo, I believe, also means the sort of belief like I trust, or I count on, or I depend upon. So to tell someone, they give you some information, say, I believe you. You can mean, I think you were telling me a fact that 2 + 2 = 4. It can also mean, I trust your opinion and you wouldn't lead me astray. Does that make sense? So credo, I believe, is a statement of faith. That statement of faith is both factual. It starts off with the biblical creed, Jesus is Lord. I believe, credo, Jesus is Lord. It's a statement of faith that's factual. I believe that Jesus indeed is Lord. But it also means not just I believe that in a 2 + 2 = 4 sense. That's true. But it also means I trust him and I depend on him. Every creed, in essence, is the outgrowth of a smart aleck. A smart aleck says, well, what does that mean? And think about a snotty kid in the class, and the teacher's trying to explain something, and the kid keeps raising his hand, but what does that mean? Like, I'm being silly about this. We referenced it last week, so when I talked about heretics, the vast majority of heretics were deeply faithful and they were trying to do the right thing. They just made a choice where they didn't need to make a choice, and that choice had substantial consequences. But anyway, you have to become more detailed when somebody says, what does that mean? You have to think, okay, I thought we were on the same page here, but if you're asking that question, give me a second, let me think about it. And now I'm going to explain the same thing to you, but with more detail. To say Jesus is Lord, well, what does that mean? Jesus who? Okay, Jesus of Nazareth, son of Mary and Joseph, but son of God, and God from God, and light from light, very God of very God, and begotten not by, blah, 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 right? Lord, what does Lord mean? Well, okay, we know that Lord means like the boss, the ruler, the chief, or whatever, but what does it mean in this particular sense? Okay, well, now we're talking about, are we talking about his divinity, or are we talking about his authority? And then we start explaining in different ways. When you look at the Apostles' Creed versus the Nicene Creed, you can tell which one came first, the Apostles' Creed, because it's shorter. They say the same thing, but then somebody took a piece of it to say, well, what does that mean? Okay, well, let me give you more detail to explain it. And the Nicene Creed then reflects it has extra lines because you can see where the issue was. When the Apostles' Creed says, I believe in God the Father Almighty. I believe in Jesus. Okay. The Nicene Creed adds creator of heaven and earth, just in case you were confused about which God the Father Almighty. The Apostles' Creed says, I believe in Jesus Christ, his Son. Nicene Creed adds, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary. And each one of those gets poked at. Well, what does that mean? Well, what does that mean? Well, what does that mean? And the Nicene Creed and all the subsequent creeds then have to answer the question. And how do you answer the question? But by giving more information. The creeds aren't creating doctrine. They are simply explaining doctrine in relation to a question about it. Because if you don't have the question, you don't have to think about how to explain it in detail. Where did Lula and I meet? Well, we met at UF. And if you're satisfied with that, that's all you need to know. But if you say, well, when? Okay, well, it was technically the fall of 1993. I was a freshman, she was a sophomore. It was through InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I can tell this whole story about this and that and the other thing and blah, 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 blah. But it kind of, both sentences are true, but the one with the more detail is because somebody asked for something more, asked for something further, asked for a deeper explanation, or asked to clarify something, or whatever it is. Lula and I met at UF. Oh, the University of Fordham? No, weirdo. The University of Florida, go Gators. So maybe it's correcting something, an assumption that was wrong. Maybe it's responding to a question that says, well, I think it means this, but I think it means that. Maybe it's somebody's just simply saying, well, what does that mean? I don't quite understand that phrase. Can you explain it further? And we go on from there.
And Athanasius tried.
Athanasius is, it gets really long. The Athanasian Creed is like 4 times as long as the Nicene Creed, and it gets super, 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 super detailed. But a lot of this is an outgrowth of kind of a functional thing. What does that mean? And if it's not clear enough, and we've got multiple opinions about it, but this is kind of important, which of those definitions is correct? So even in the section, it talks about a lot of this theology, the thinking about God, of thinking about faith and religion, comes from the ground up. While the decisions might be made from the top, these ecumenical councils, all the bishops coming together, all the leaders of the church, gathering and praying and asking for the Holy Spirit to lead us into all truth, a lot of these questions spring up from just average people or from random little churches who maybe didn't get the memo and they started doing something in a funny way, and nobody knew about it until it had gone on for quite some time. And once they found out about it, somebody said, whoa, 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 wait a second. We got to fix that because we're all doing this and you're doing that. We got to figure this out. And that is kind of this natural outgrowth of the faith needing to have, it's less about creating doctrine. It's more about clarifying and explaining what's already there. But you've just never had to articulate it before. There's a lot of stuff that's true, but it's inarticulated because we haven't needed to.
You just assume.
Well, it's just assumed, but if you were asked, Morgan, you look cold. Yes, I am. Well, explain some of the sensations you're feeling right now. And you might think about, well, my toes are colder than my fingers are, and I've got this little shiver, but the shawl feels pretty nice. I've got it on my shoulders. I kind of wish it was all the way around. You start thinking through what's still true, but now you're able to give more detail about it because you're stopping to think about it. We follow that. That's my nutshell about the creeds. and then the subsequent creeds are again answering questions that pop up again. Okay, well, that explanation needs more detail, so we do another one with more detail. Well, that one brought up another issue. Okay, well, now we got to explain that one. It comes here, and so on and so forth. That's kind of my nutshell.
Did anything change with those creeds between the prayer book of 1928 and the 97 or 79?
The 79 prayer book and the 28 prayer book, to my knowledge, aren't using any kind of different creeds. They might use them in different places. They might use them in different services. I think I technically grew up in the 28 prayer book I was baptized in the 28 prayer book. I think that the Apostles' Creed was used more often in that book, but that was also not a Eucharistically, it wasn't oriented towards the Eucharist every Sunday. The 28 prayer book allows for communion every Sunday, but it assumes you're going to do morning prayer on Sunday and you're going to do communion periodically.
See, I had memorized all this stuff for confirmation.
Yeah.
And so then when they changed the prayer book, I don't like it. I like it the old way, the way I'm used to it. And sometimes I refuse to do it the new way. I say the way I learned it.
Sure. The only issue is the new way is about the same age as I am, and I don't feel very new at all. So at some point, that's like the Orthodox talking about the new calendar. The new calendar is over 1,000 years old, and maybe we need to just stop calling stuff new and old at some point. At some point, it is what it is.
Vatican II came up. I was still in the Roman Catholic Church. And when Vatican II came up, those of us that were raised earlier,
it's a big change. Yeah, it's a big. What are you doing? I don't get it. And this is totally different, right?
I was taught one thing and now two.
Okay. That's kind of my run through quickly. Anything else from the chapter? Yes. So we are taking next week off because of Thanksgiving week, and I won't be here. But we're going to start chapter 2, and we're going to do roughly the same thing. We're going to do that first section. I've got pages 45 through 62. So it's about half of the first half of chapter 2, give or take.
Okay, until it gets to church in the pews.
Yes, kind of the same thing that we did this past time. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, we good?
Thank you, Father.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Enjoy.